then hear the appellant's information, and then listen to any public comment. I then, at the end of this, make a recommendation to the director. The decision whether to remove trees, keep trees, add fines, do whatever is that of the director. So I try and give the director as much information as possible. But at the end of the day, it's up to the director to decide whether my recommendations are accepted or rejected. So, and then from the director's office, the appellants and anyone interested in the findings will be notified. So if any of you want to put your email addresses or any contact information into the chat room, the director's office will then have that information and can provide that to you. So there'll be no decisions issued today. Decisions will come at a later date. I want to thank everyone for their patience, both for me and I will ask that you be patient as we work through these Zoom things. It's not always the easiest things to do, but we want to give everyone a chance. So I will find an opportunity. For some reason I miss someone, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know, because the goal is to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to be heard. So with that, the way the hearings will go is we'll call the hearing. The department will speak first. We'll then ask the appellant to speak. If there's any follow-up, we'll have that opportunity, and then we'll ask the public to speak. I ask that you be respectful of one another. We all have different opinions, and that's all fine. And that anything be directed to me and not necessarily to any of the speakers, so that the questions, issues, comments should be directed to me. So with that, we'll stop as far as my introduction goes. Are we going to take things out of order? Is that Ms. Nalberry, is that the way we're going to go? Is Hastings last, you said? That's last, number 7. Okay, so we'll go right down the order. So we're going to start with item number 2, order number 203786. It's 65 Ocean Avenue. And the hearing is to consider the removal of 12 street trees and 2 significant trees with replacement of 8 trees at 65 Ocean Avenue. Staff approved the removals and the public protested. Department? You're muted.
Sorry, I'm muted.
That's all right.
I'm going to share my screen.
Okay. So just for the record, if everyone could state their name, who they represent, and spell it so we get the spelling correct, that would be great.
Okay, so my name is Susan Nalberry. I'll be representing the Bureau of Urban Forestry tonight. And just for our attendance record, I'm just going to keep emphasizing that please email urbanforestry@sfdpw.org, and you'll be added to the contact list to receive resulting decisions. If you've previously submitted a protest, we already have your information, but if you want to receive information on the other cases, please email us. So our first case is order number 203786 to consider removal of 12 street trees and 2 significant trees with replacement of 8 street trees at 65 Ocean. And staff approved the removals and the public has protested. This item was continued from last month because of the difference of labeling between street and significant trees. We have since straightened out that labeling. It is 8 street trees and 12 street trees and 2 significant trees. So these are the trees on Ocean Avenue. There are 8 street trees on Ocean Avenue. There are 7 Metrosideros excelsa, which are New Zealand Christmas trees, and 1 ginkgo in the middle. You can see they're behind the fence line, but they actually sit right on the property line. So they straddle the property line. They are not at the curb, which makes it a little confusing. But our measurements and our Arbor Pro census has determined that these trees are actually street trees, not significant trees. And so this is just a closer view of the trees that were farther on the right by the bus zone. It's trees 5 through 9 on their plan, although we order the trees ordering from with the flow of traffic. And you can't see on the far right, but that there's a street tree tucked in there behind one of the other trees. And that one's a street tree. And then there's a tree behind it, and that's a significant tree. And I personally measured all of these trees myself. So I know that these are street and significant trees. And you can see that they both have very poor structure. They've been topped in the past. This building, not by the owners of this building, this is an older property. And there's the second significant tree, Pittosporum. It also has poor structure. It's a little bit dark in there, but there's a little bit of decay from past topping cuts. The other thing is that these trees are all kind of raised above grade a little bit because they're planted in property by the previous property owner. So this is tree 2, and it's our tree 2, but it's their tree. It's reversed, so it's tree 8 for them. And you can see that it has very poor structure. It was probably topped right at that point when it was first planted, or very early on, and it has very deeply included bark, and the limbs are crossing. This tree, you know, if let to grow any larger, will probably have some major limb failures. And you can see in this photo that the trees are above grade, above sidewalk grade. And so this is the next tree, but it's just emphasizing that many of the trees have been topped in the past and have very poor structure. And when you have a tree this size, it's very difficult to correct the structure. The larger cuts you make, the more chance you have of introducing a decay pathogen. And this is the ginkgo in the middle. It also has very poor structure. It's very small. And essentially, because all the replacements are 36-inch box trees, this would be an in-kind replacement. This is tree 6. It's actually in fairly good condition, has good structure. But again, because these trees are all sitting right on the property line, any excavation work occurring right up to the property line would essentially destabilize all of these trees. So it's pretty difficult to build the building as planned and designed without entering into the critical root zone of every single one of these trees that are basically sitting right on the property line. And this tree is just it's tree 7, the multi-stem tree. And it has multiple codominant stems at a lower point in the main union there. And it looks like it has some stump spreading there, probably for some past damage. And trees on Alemany frontage, there's a trident maple. They're not climate appropriate. You can see this picture is taken in August. It has a lot of dieback. They do not like California weather, do not like this climate. They require a lot of water. They require summer rains and cold winters. And we don't really have that in San Francisco. So this tree more or less has stagnated in growth. It hasn't grown very much. Its structure is also not very great. When I say structure is poor, I mean that you kind of want a tree that has a main union, and the limbs that are growing laterally should not be the same size. Those are called codominant stems. And tree 2 on Alemany, we planted these trees 2 years ago. It is a major challenge for us to water trees right now. And because this project is planting 36-inch box trees, the trees would essentially be replaced in kind also, but then would alleviate the city from watering these trees. This one in particular looks a little windburned. It's missing some of its lower canopy. It probably was vandalized at some point. And then the third tree, same situation. It does have codominant stems. It would require a lot of structural work. to fix this tree to make it have good structure for the long term. And also it's only 2 years old as well. So it would essentially be replaced in kind with a 36-inch box tree. Tree 4 is missing. It likely died of planting shock because of the economic climate post-pandemic. Our landscaping funds have been essentially decimated, so replanting the trees has been very difficult. So this basin is empty, and it will no longer be empty once this project plants these trees. And tree 5, same situation. This one has a little bit less vigorous growth than the other two. So it will be replaced in kind with the 36-inch box as well. And unfortunately, I do have like an update for this project. First this, so basically what I looked at is in order to retain all of these trees, the building would have to be set back at least 70 feet to make room for construction. It's really hard to build right up against trees. We see this a lot in other counties where they retain very large trees, but years later they die of construction impacts. And by then it's too hard to go after the buildings for replacement trees because they've been sold and changed hands. So oftentimes removing the tree before construction begins and getting the promised number of replacements and in lieu fees may work a little bit better than allowing construction to occur within the footprint of the critical root zone. We are aware that these are established trees, but in this case, it doesn't seem like construction would be feasible, especially not without shrinking the building footprint. And as stated by the applicant, and they state that keeping the existing trees will result in a major reduction of square footage. They have a home density bonus, which effectively requires further residential units to be built. So they'll have significant losses in that case if they shrink the building. And a lot of these decisions, the building design, are made at the planning level. So the Bureau of Urban Forestry's job is to assess the trees, see what the construction impacts would be. Could the trees survive these impacts? The Bureau of Urban Forestry has not as much decision-making when it comes to redesign of the building. These plans are set in place years in advance before Bureau of Urban Forestry does a review. And so I advise anyone who wants to take part in these decisions to go to the Planning Commission's website. They have a website and they have commission meetings that the public can join. But the building designs are often just set in place. And so our job is to assess if our trees can survive these construction impacts as best we can and to mitigate replacements. And so this building has 440 feet of frontage. And so that requires 22 trees, which means they can only actually plant 8 trees. And so we want to be as upfront about this as possible. Because it's better to be upfront about the fact that there will be a loss of trees now rather than later on when the construction gets going. But they will be planting 36-inch box trees that will be maintained by this building and watered, and they'll be paying 14 in lieu fees. In addition, the construction code doesn't take into account the loss of the 2 significant trees. So the project owner understands that they'll be paying 2 additional in lieu fees. So they'll actually be paying 16 in lieu fees and planting 8 trees. Unfortunately, I have an update for you. So the GC for the project notified Buff that 2 trees were removed prior to project issuance. And we'll let them speak on how that occurred. But we did issue the fine for ginkgo and we appraised the value of both trees. But the ginkgo appraised for less than the in lieu fee, and our code requires that we pick the one that's higher. So we appraised the ginkgo, and the reason why we were able to appraise the value is because essentially there's going to be a net loss of trees on the site. So we were able to appraise the value. If the tree were replaceable, or we can't really appraise the value. So the Metro Sideros, the tree on the right, actually appraised for $7,300. And that total is $9,493, and that has already been paid. So we consider the matter of the fine complete. here. And tree protection has since been installed. I visited the site myself. So that's the ginkgo that I showed you previously that was illegally removed. And the tree that was illegally removed there. And I just wanted to point out that that tree on the right, it measured beyond the significant zone. So it was not a street or a significant tree. But this is just a view from the inside to show which trees were removed. And this is the plan just to show which trees actually I measured personally and compared to the plans. And so the trees in the circle are not protected, although they are shown on the plans. They are not street or significant trees. And then the 2 trees with the X's have already been removed. So we just want to be as transparent about that as possible. And I looked at the site and I don't think that the removal of these trees accelerates the building construction, because the demolition of the building is actually towards the bottom of those plans, away from the trees. So unfortunately, it was an error, but we did issue the fine and the fine has been paid. And so to be consistent with how we handle similar cases, the Bureau of Urban Forestry approved the removal of 12 street trees and 2 significant trees.
Okay, as that concludes your presentation?
That concludes the presentation for 65 motion.
Just a couple of questions before we move to the appellant, and then we'll let the public speak, including the applicant. On the tree where you had the X's for the removal, you said there was 2 trees that have been removed, but there's actually 3 trees with X's.
Correct. The tree with the X is not protected.
Okay.
It's not a street or significant tree, and I measured these myself before I even posted the trees for removal.
Okay, so that's not one that's.
Yes, so that is not one that is of concern to us, even though there's an X there.
Gotcha.
This drawing was provided by the applicant.
Correct. And then the second question I had is the code requires 22 trees. We're replacing it with 8, and is that because of the construction would not allow the replacement of all 22, or the planting of 22?
Correct. So if you look at this planting plan here, there is a bust zone on Ocean.
Correct.
And we can't have trees in bust zones. And it's only a 10-foot sidewalk. So the only situation where we could have trees in bust zones is if it's a 15-foot sidewalk.
Okay.
And they also have multiple vaults going in, which are required. And again, the vault placement's also decided at the Planning Commission. And
Okay.
so they're loading up all the replacements on Alemany, which I vetted the placement and they are properly placed and spaced. And Alemany does have like the most traffic. It's a louder street. So at the very least, adding the replacements on Alemany will mitigate that.
Okay. All right. So in other words, they're replacing as many trees as they can, what the department suggested.
Correct. So they're required to maximize the tree planting.
And they've done that with this plan. Okay.
They've done it. Correct. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Very good. Would the appellant like to speak? So whoever the appellant is, if the appellant would like to speak, and then we'll let the project sponsor speak. I'm looking on the.
Does the appellant want to raise your hand?
Yeah, I'm looking on the, and I don't see anyone raising their hand.
I don't either. If you're dialing in, we don't have any dial-ins, but if you're dialing in, you can hit *6 from your phone. The appellant.
Okay, so what we'll do then, appellant, we're not going to forget you, but we'll move on to the project sponsor and let the project sponsor speak, and then we'll give the appellant another opportunity. So is a project sponsor?
John Kelvin is here, has his hand raised. John, go ahead and unmute your phone.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Sure can.
Great. Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Nalberry, for your presentation. Good evening, John Kevlin here, JOHN-KEV as in Victor, LIN, with Ruben Junius and Rose on behalf of the project sponsor, Presidio Bay Ventures. The proposed tree removal at 65 Ocean Ave is necessary in order to construct the approved Home SF project at the site. The project is a 55-foot tall building with 193 units. 25% of those are affordable, and a 6,000 square foot affordable childcare use. An appeal of the project was denied at the Board of Appeals in January 2020. And this is the first Home SF project in the city, which provides a density bonus in exchange for greater affordable housing than is otherwise required by state law. Now, the project is being built to the lot line on all 3 frontages, and so therefore requires the removal of the 14 significant and street trees along its Ocean and Alamany frontages. And as Ms. Newberry said, staff has reviewed and approved the removal of all these trees after some significant analysis. The project will replace the 14 removed trees with 8 new street trees consistent with the Better Streets Plan. There are a number of, getting to the last question, there are a number of conflicts in the street along Ocean and Cayuga, the bus stop, there's a number of utility vaults, and there's also the project garage entrance, such that the project is unable to provide the trees every 20 feet along those frontages. On the Alamany frontage, the project will replace fair or poor trees with 6 new trees, and they will have expanded 48-inch tree wells. And then in lieu fees will be paid for the 16 trees that cannot be replaced. It's a total of $35,000 to be used elsewhere in the city to improve the tree canopy. And as Ms. Newberry mentioned, unfortunately, the GC was doing staging at the site a couple weeks back. They were not aware of this pending action, and they did remove 2 of the trees. It was not authorized by the project sponsor. We notified Ms. Newberry as soon as we found out about this, and are paying the increased fine or fee as a result. So that much more to go towards the improvement of the tree canopy elsewhere in the city. So in closing, the removal of all 14 protected trees are necessary for the construction of this important city project. Will be replaced with the maximum number of street trees, all of which are consistent with city tree guidelines, and will result in significant additional city funds for the improvement of tree canopy offsite. And thank you. And we're here, Mr. Hearing Officer, if you have any questions.
Very good. Listen, thank you very much for your presentation. Is there anyone else from the project that's going to speak, sir?
No, thank you.
Okay, very good. All right, so department spoken, project sponsor spoken. Would the appellant like to speak? We'll look to see if there's any raised hands, or if any member of the public would like to speak. We'll see if there's any raised hands.
It looks like we have Lance. Lance, go ahead. Lance. We have
You
Lance.
have somebody, I think we have to unmute him somehow.
Yeah, no, he just needs to unmute. If not, we can go.
Hey guys, it's John Kevlin again. I just got a request to unmute, so this is not for me.
Okay, very good. So,
Okay.
Thanks,
Can you hear me
Lance.
now? This
Yes,
is Lance. Yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
yeah. So just to repeat, I wasn't the appellant on this particular project. I did point out to Carla Short that the application and the checklist that were submitted by the applicant didn't jive with the rest of the project, with the project permit, and that was corrected. Thank you. I'm also just, there's one thing that happens with these particular projects. This is just a comment. It's not an objection or anything, but apparently this has gone through planning years ago or quite a while ago. It's been approved, and the trees need to be removed to do the project. And I guess I'm sort of curious about Bureau of Urban Forestry's role in this. They come in and they say, well, we got to take all these trees out. And then they go through the trees and say, well, this tree is not in good shape, and this one's going to fall over tomorrow, and yada da. If you're going to take the trees out for the project, why do you have to go through the condition of each tree? I mean, if suppose the tree was in great condition, would you keep it? So I just sort of find it a little bit disingenuous to have trees, downgraded on the fly here when they're going to come down anyway. So that's and that actually, I'd just like to make one more comment to Buff, if I could. There are 3 other projects on the agenda that do not have applications filed. And I wonder if they could just make a note to always put the permit number in the listing, the online listing that we have to look at. Okay, thank you. That's it.
Very good. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your comments. Mr. Clip, I believe you have your hand up. You've been unmuted. Or
Yeah, can you hear me?
sure can, sir. Go ahead.
Thanks. Okay, Susan, I want to thank you for that very thorough presentation. Regarding the fine here, I noticed that, one of the things that Susan mentioned that I know several of us out here are already aware of are the financial crisis, which has already led to a near complete reduction of tree planting budget while we're simultaneously fighting climate change and a pandemic that's forced a lot of us to look to our street trees for access to nature while we're stuck at home. So I guess considering all of this, I'm not sure why the department hasn't gone a little more aggressively after available remedies, especially when you consider that this particular applicant was well aware that they did not have a permit for this work since this was continued from the last hearing. Relatively speaking, the penalty is a pittance compared to the value of the project writ large. And this kind of penalty just rewards bad behavior, whether it was intended or not. It was work done without a permit, and that's not something that generally other departments in the city of San Francisco take very lightly or just let folks off with a slap on the wrist. And so, for instance, I would ask the department to go back and consider all of the penalties that are available under Section 811 of Article 16, and specifically fines that are available for work that is done without a permit. And then regarding the comment of the Bureau's role in the various stages of development, and primarily the last stage of development, where at some basically, there isn't much point to trying to, I guess, as Lance said, look at the status of the trees if we all know they're coming out because of planning. This is something that the public has been raising up for years in these forums, in front of this department, these departmental hearings, in front of the Board of Appeals. This is something that I think the city is very aware of. And but for all of us coming to these hearings, maybe nothing would be done about this or even known about this at all. So I would just like to note that the department is really very well aware of this massive shortcoming, and I would encourage the department to take some steps to fix this itself, whether that is the superintendent, whether that is the director of the department, talking to the director of planning. But the members of the public are the only ones on these calls that are not paid to be here. And we're continually having to spend what few hours we may have in the day, or the time I could be spending with my wife right now, to tell the city how to do a better job by our environment and by our people and by our ecology, when the city already knows what it has to do. So I will continue to raise these things up, but I would really ask that the city do as much work as we are all out here doing for free to make these changes. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you, sir. I'm looking to see if there's anyone else with a hand raised that wishes to speak on this item. I'll give it another moment.
We did have a raised hand, but they lowered it, so I think we're good to go to the next item.
Right, I did see that raised hand briefly. Okay, very good. So with that, if there's nothing else, Ms. Newberry, would you like to anything else, or we're good? Hearing nothing else, I assume we're good.
On mute.
Okay. So with that, we'll
Sorry
close
about
it.
that.
Oh, that's all right, no problem.
We can move on.
All right, sounds good. With that, we'll move on to item number 3 on the agenda. It's order number 203-787, 3400 Laguna Street, to consider the removal of one significant tree on private property with replacement at 3400 Laguna Street. Staff approved the removal of the public removal, and the public has protested. Department, please.
So this is a Brazilian pepper, and our inspector actually made a little video, and she wanted to speak on the matter herself, but she's on military leave, so she couldn't, or she's currently in active duty. So she made this little video herself. So hopefully you guys can hear and see it.
The Bureau of Urban Forestry approved the removal of one significant tree on the property of 3400 Laguna. A significant tree is a tree on private property within 10 feet of the public right-of-way that meets one of three size criteria: a 12-inch diameter trunk, a 15-foot canopy spread, or 20 feet in height. This tree is located approximately 7 feet from the 15-foot right-of-way. The tree is a Brazilian pepper tree, and in this setting provides shade and ornamental value. Unfortunately, the tree had a failure at the main scaffolding limbs. 1/4 to 1/3 of the tree canopy failed in August. As a result, the tree is unbalanced and susceptible to future failures. A hazard tree is a tree with structural defects, likely to cause failure of all or part of the tree, which could then strike a target. A target can be a vehicle, building, or place where people gather. The tree was topped in the years past and as a result has poor branch structure. Urban Forestry approved this tree for removal because pruning cannot mitigate the poor structure. The canopy is unbalanced and susceptible to future failures, especially as the branches have some poor attachments from previous topping cuts, and these branches are newly exposed. The property owner should be granted a removal permit to replace the tree.
Okay.
So hopefully you all heard that. So I'm just going to go back and in case anybody for some reason couldn't hear that. So the tree basically had this major failure where there's decay at these unions, and essentially it has exposed these upper limbs, these remaining limbs, to failure. You can see that they have very little interior canopy. So you can't prune or reduce to reduce the end weight because there's nothing to prune back to. That would essentially be considered topping, and there wouldn't be any canopy left in there. And then the tree would also have to tap into its reserves to produce sprouts, which ultimately shortens the life of the tree, and it would leave it more susceptible to decay. And it has obviously been topped before, which is why it has this structure. And then it was then limbed up. Through the years, various arboricultural practices have been done by various property owners, and essentially this tree cannot be saved by pruning, but there is ample room to replant the tree. It's in the backyard setback, and there you can see the wound and decay that Sarah had put in there, the inspector. Sarah had put a photo in there in the previous video, but you can see it in here in the photo. And they also have plenty of room for replacement. The replacement will be placed in the significant zone, so it will become another significant tree. They would be required to plant a tree that can become a significant tree, which is 15 feet in height, 12 inches in diameter, and it will be within 10 feet of the public right of way.
Okay. So those conditions, as far as the size and placement of the tree, are part of the permit agreement.
Yes, so it must reach 20 feet in height. Yeah, so basically if they remove a significant tree, they have to replace a tree that will become a significant tree, unless there's no room for replacement. In this case, there's ample room for replacement, and the property owner understands this, will replace a tree, and yeah, it will become 20 feet in height, 12 inches in diameter, or 15 feet in canopy spread.
Okay, all right, very good. Thank you very much. Is the appellant present, or would the appellant like to speak? So if you are, please raise your hand. I'm
All right,
looking.
Lance, but before Lance, is a appellant present? Do we know?
I don't know who the appellant is.
I only see one hand raised. I'll go ahead and let Lance go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, sir. Mr. Carnes?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Sure
Yes.
can, sir.
Okay, thank you. And once again, I just want to point out that on the listing, Bureau of Urban Forestry has an online list of trees that are up for removal. This one it says that the owner applied for a permit, but there's no application in the online permit file. So we have no idea what the conditions are on this. I would like Bureau of Urban Forestry maybe make a checklist when they list things online. If it says the owner applied for a permit, please list the permit number. Thank you. Also, I looked at, there's a photograph that Ms. Newberry showed a little earlier that showed about half the tree falling into the property side of the, look, a whole bunch of branches. There you go. I guess those were removed. I saw this tree in the photographs, and I lived pretty nearby, so I walked by one day and looked at it. It's not that big of a tree. It's it's probably only like 15 feet high or something. So, and in its current condition, after these branches were removed, it looks like it's pretty stable. I'm not an arborist, but you know, I wouldn't remove that tree if I were the owner. I'd maintain it and let it be. And they also mentioned that the tree had been topped, which I presume is an illegal or a non-recommended practice in arboriculture, as they call it. And I wonder if there are any fines that have been levied for this. And also, it seems perhaps the tree was not maintained for many years. It wasn't pruned properly or maintained properly. So are there any penalties for this that Buff can apply to the owner? Even though it's their tree, we're now responsible for you know, getting it either removed or you know, fixed up. So if you could comment on penalties for improper care, like topping or lack of pruning. Thank you.
Ms. Newberry, do you want to respond to that? Two quick questions.
Sure. So we don't know when the tree was topped. We just know that there's evidence of topping based on the structure and the decay. And I can't say whether or not that happened before or after the significant tree ordinance was put in place. We also don't know if this current owner topped the tree. So it's kind of hard to know when the tree was topped. But there have also been a lot of changes in the way municipalities have managed trees. And the topping is definitely frowned upon, but more recently, people didn't understand that you don't do interior crown cleaning. People think that that helped air go through the tree, which is 100% a myth. You don't want an interior crown clean. You basically only remove interior canopy when you want to correct structure. But basically, we don't know when this tree was topped, and we don't know whether or not it was before or after the significant tree ordinance. So I don't think we assessed any penalties for this, and we probably won't assess penalties retroactively.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Mr. Clip, I think you're next up with your hand up.
Yep.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, just a point of order, since it's a public record and our words kind of matter. I think we refer to someone as the appellant only if the decision by the Bureau was against the applicant. Otherwise, it's just the applicant. I also want to compliment Sarah Stacy on that video. I think she's set the bar pretty high for Chris Buck's next presentation. I can't comment on what the tree looks like in real life, but because I haven't gone by or looked at it. But what I would say is regarding replacement, I know that Susan mentioned it would be a significant tree. I was wondering if there would also be any consideration for maximum environmental benefits. So say, for instance, a native species that would be, this is one of the things that a lot of, we've got a whole biodiversity and native species group of folks in the city that are constantly pushing for the planting of native trees. And in terms of the department's perspective on that, it usually takes a really big sidewalk and tree basin to support that. So I'm wondering if that is something that they would be able to push for in this instance, since it does have the space and the headroom for something like that. Thanks.
Ms. Newberry, do you want to respond to the replacement question?
We can certainly advocate for a large stature tree. It's a little more difficult when it's in private property. Our code definitely gives us leeway to do that. in the sidewalk for street trees, but it's a lot more difficult to regulate that requirement on private property unless it's construction related, which in this case it's not.
Okay.
But we will certainly advocate for a larger stature or more environmentally beneficial tree that this owner would also be comfortable with in terms of helping them choose the species and helping them figure out which species is most suitable for their property. In this case, there is a lot of space, so we'll advocate for environmentally beneficial tree.
Great, thank you. Mr. Clip, if I don't mind, just so I'm correct in the future, I guess the reason I'm using the term appellant is because it says the public protested. And so they were, my thought was they were appealing the staff recommendation. So if my use of that term is incorrect, please let me know. Because I want to.
Yeah, no, appellant is usually refers to the applicant whose application has been denied. Members of the public who protest are just members of the public who protest. We don't have an official, really official name for ourselves unless we actually appeal the outcome of this hearing.
Okay, all right, well, very good. Well, then I'll call them okay, well, I'll just call them public. Thank you very much. I appreciate the correction.
Of course, no problem.
So Mr. Mahler, Eric Mahler, I see your hand up. Would you like to speak?
Hi, thank you. We were the applicant on this project.
Okay.
As Joshua said, Sarah did a great job outlining all of the details. The only things I'd like to add are this was actually the second instance of significant limb failure on the same tree. The photo that you see right now on your screen is actually the first time that it failed, and then approximately 20% more of the canopy failed 2 months later. That's really the only thing I'd like to add.
Great. Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate your time and adding that information. Okay, is there anyone else that would like to speak? Let me look through the list, see if there's any hands raised. I don't see any, but we want to make sure. Okay, so I see none. Hearing none, I'm going to close this item. All right, so we'll close that item, move on to item number 4. It's order number 203788, 1122 Broderick Street, to consider the removal of one street tree with replacement at 1122 Broderick Street. Staff approved the removal and the public has protested. Ms. Strawberry?
So we have a Eucalyptus sideroxylon, a red ironbark, and it is a street tree. It is very large, very mature, very established. And if this tree had better structure, we would certainly not be pursuing the removal of this tree. The Bureau of Urban Forestry is taking on this removal. There's no application associated with it. And the reason is because the structure is so poor, the limbs are so weakly attached that it has been having very frequent limb failures, and it has been requiring very frequent pruning and cleanup. With all these return visits and the amount of maintenance required, the tree is essentially has like very little canopy remaining on the interior. So you can see like all the canopy is at the top. There's very little interior canopy, which trees grow with photosynthesis. Leaves help help absorb carbon. Carbon sequestration helps put on mass. And with a reduced canopy in a tree this size, the vigor is going to be greatly reduced. So it's not actually going to put on mass that quickly. And essentially, there we go. This species also has a tendency to drop limbs, and it takes a lot of maintenance to do this sort of work. And if you actually look at how well this tree is growing and how much canopy it has versus how many return visits and the amount of risk it poses, we basically decided that this tree has outlived its benefits to the public right of way. And I know it has absorbed a lot of carbon. It has a lot of carbon in that wood, but what it is doing is not putting on that much growth because it has very low vigor. And then it's requiring a lot of resources to go and maintain that tree. So this is where in urban forestry, the tree is basically hit the axis of the cost benefit analysis. And because this tree also has a public safety issue with like the limb failures, we also can't undermine the public's trust in us to maintain the urban forest. The tree is replaceable. If approved, it would be removed, but it probably wouldn't be extremely quickly because it's going to be done by the city. But it would be done to prevent these limb failures in the future when we're at least close to that area to do maintenance. We want to see this tree approved before a very rainy winter where more limb failures could occur, to be consistent with how we handle all these similar cases. And the fact that the tree has very weakly attached branches, low vigor, and low canopy, the Bureau of Urban Forestry approved the tree for removal with replacement.
Okay, so for the replacement, can you speak to the replacement?
We have not gone that far into it, but we have not gone down that road very far. But it will be a large stature tree because there's no overhead lines. This tree has to be replaced by the Bureau of Urban Forestry, but again, I cannot promise on that timeline. However, it's a large basin, and we know that the Friends of the Urban Forest has grants with CAL FIRE. If they plant large basins, CAL FIRE will essentially fund that, and we can water it, even though our watering is very, very tight. But when we consider the replacement tree, it will be a large stature tree.
Okay.
All right, so
Renee had her hand up, John, and I'll go ahead and if you can go ahead, Renee.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes,
yes, we
go
can.
ahead.
Wonderful. I am the co-owner of 1120, 1122 Broderick Street. And with the aid of my neighbor, Merle Easton, who lives at 1130, we have been agitating to have this removed. Let me give you, as quickly as I can, the history of the tree. Redevelopment planted eucalyptus down both sides of the 2 to 4 block of Broderick Street back in around 1974 or 75. Along came a fantastic wind, which knocked out and caused the removal of all the other trees except our tree, which was protected by our building. And Remedios Munar, who is my co-owner, did not wish to have this removed. All the history of this tree has had this unusual bark situation in it. And about 2 years ago, a neighbor wanted a visual access to the East Bay and chopped down the tree, and an arborist said, "You've ruined the tree." Well, that was back, I'd say, at least 10 years ago. The last 2 or 3 years, the tree has shown this tremendous difficulty. And 2 years ago, when we had our strong rain, all of a sudden, the eucalyptus tree produced oil, and it flicked onto our building, effectively dappling the yellow facade. I have pictures that I could supply the Public Works build about it, and I tried to get an adjustment on the cost of that and failed miserably. So we have no desire to keep this tree. I would love to have a magnolia tree replace it, but the other trees in the block are New Zealand Christmas trees. And that's the sum of my comments.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. And I believe you submitted a letter. I believe I saw a letter. Is that correct?
I submitted a letter in July of '79, and then along in November of the end of November of 2019, excuse me. I went up to the building, the office in City Hall, and I mentioned the fact that we had not received any word. And Miss Farquhar, is that her name? Got on to it. She came out and looked at the tree, and Merle Easton got in and asked her to come out again, or someone else to come out again. And that's when they agreed that the tree needed to be removed.
I have a copy of your letter, ma'am. So yes, it's the July 17th of 2019. I guess the city,
Right.
the city moves slowly.
Yeah, it does indeed, but at least it moves.
Well, that's a good thing. So thank you very much for your comments and being part of this.
I
see-
didn't know whether or not I needed to submit a formal additional application or not. So that's where that stands.
I think we're good. So, but thank you very much. Mr. Gordon, I think you're up next. Mr. Andy Gordon,
Yeah, we're just waiting for him to unmute.
there he is.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Andy Gordon. I live on the street, across the street from this tree. I just wanted to ask a question real quick before I do make my objection. It was mentioned that a large stature tree would replace this. Is there any indication as to what size that tree would be at the time of replacement?
Ms. Nauberry, can you speak? Are you able to speak to that this time, or?
We typically plant 15-gallon trees, and the reason is because they take a lot less water and they're easier to plant. They're less expensive, and the main reason for planting 15-gallon trees is because they take less water to establish. They have a longer lifespan, so we see a lot of times with larger stature box size replacements, they take 4 to 5 times as much water as a 15-gallon tree. And ultimately, when you stress a tree in its very early on in its life, this results in their growth being stunted. So we see that when you plant a 15-gallon tree, you end up getting a tree that grows a lot more successfully. And you'll actually, in the first few years, see a dramatic growth with a 15-gallon tree. But yeah, typically a 15-gallon.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so I just, my objection at this point is, the pictures are a little, that one picture where it, you say there's no canopy, it doesn't show the whole picture. Like I said, I live on the street. When you look down the block from the street, you can see that this tree clearly is the tree that connects to the trees across the street. It does create a beautiful canopy. And it was one of the things that really drew my wife and I to this block when we decided to purchase our home here. It looks to me like it could be trimmed to prevent anything from falling onto the house while still maintaining the appearance that canopies over the street. That's all I really want to say.
Okay, thank you very much for participating. Is there anyone else, any other members of the public that wish to speak on this item? Mr. Clip, go ahead. You're unmuted, sir. Oh, you're muted again. Now you're off.
I'm here, I think. Yeah, regarding the size of the tree. So for those who don't know, a 15-gallon tree is basically 1.5 inch diameter. So that's how big the tree is going to be, maybe about 6 or 7 feet tall and 1.5 inch diameter trunk. So it's really about the smallest version of a tree that one can put. It is actually the smallest version of a tree one can put in a public right of way and still be compliant with Article 16. One thing I'd like to ask the department is regarding wood reuse. And so for a little bit of context, in 2014, a whole bunch of city departments got together, spent a lot of time and taxpayer dollars on putting together a brilliant urban forest plan that we since have not really used to any impactful effect. But one of the key recommendations of that urban forest plan specifically recommends wood reuse, and it specifically recommends it because when we cut down a tree and chop it all up, as the city mostly does, we lose all of that sequestered carbon, all of the work that city did for our environment. And so by reusing wood, we get to retain those benefits. And that is, again, why it is part of the urban forest plan. So I'm wondering, especially with a tree of this size, whether that is something that has been considered, and if not, why not? Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Clip. Ms. Nauberry, do you want to respond, or I don't know that you're required to. I certainly include those in the comments of the director.
I know, I understand the question. We did not consider it for this specific tree, and I know we're looking into figuring out our wood reuse program. And I know that even the Presidio has a mill, and we were working with them before COVID, but they basically shut their mill down. So we are struggling to find wood reuse sources and a way to mill it and process it. So it was not considered for this tree at this time, but I can ask what the status is of the wood reuse program and see if it would happen in time for this tree to be removed. And again, I myself do not know the timeline for this tree removal. So I can't speak to the timelines of the wood reuse program or for the tree.
Very good. Thank you. And Mr. Clip, I'm sure that Ms. Nauberry will be happy to trade emails and let you know what's going on with that. Mr. Carnes, I see your hand up. I guess you're up next. Would you speak?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
Yeah, hi. So by Renee and my friend Merle Easton, I didn't realize that was your home, but that's a pretty nice tree. I guess it's just too big. The thing I've seen happen sometimes is that a tree is designated as a removal candidate. We have a bunch of them in North Beach where I live, and I walk by them daily and say, gee, that was approved for removal like 2 years ago, but what the heck? Anyway, so, you know, as you mentioned, the city moves slowly. That tree probably will remain there for God knows how long. And the replacement tree, we had a few large ficus replaced in North Beach, and they were 48-inch box, which is quite large. And I think the trees are probably 7 or 8 feet tall. They're magnolias, and but you know they're not going to produce any shade for probably 10 plus years. So you have to be up for that. So I guess my two comments boil down to: one, the tree probably won't be removed. It's a very, very expensive removal. And number two, the replacement tree will probably be very small for a long time. So good luck.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Are there any other comments on this item? Anyone else have to do it? Do we have any other hands up? I don't see any. No other hands up. So with that, let's move on to the next item on the agenda. Item number 5 on the agenda, order number 203-789. It's 4621 Mission Street to consider removal of 2 street trees with replacement at 4621 Mission Street. Staff approved the removals and the public has protested. Ms. Marbury, would you like to make the presentation?
So I just want to point out that like I was working too quickly and I made a typo, and the application is correct, is for 3 trees.
Okay.
And we
So-
sent a hearing notice that said 2 trees, so that's why this is highlighted, because I'm correcting it here.
Got it?
But it's 3 trees, not 2 trees. I believe anyone who's protested on the basis of the 3 trees. But because of this typo, we are requesting to just continue this item, and we will still go through these slides for informational purposes. But we want to present it when we haven't made a typo on the hearing announcement.
Okay,
And so sorry for everyone that has to come back to hear that, but we can go through these slides and we can hear public comment. But I didn't want to present it as if I hadn't made a typo on the hearing announcement.
very good. So we'll go through it and as if we are, and we will just say we're going to continue. Move forward.
Okay. Okay, so the first tree, it's a Myoporum with thrips, and thrips is an insect that has basically been killing the Myoporums in San Francisco. There it is. It's a really kind of gross looking insect. It's kind of cool looking. It lays its eggs in like the pores of the stomata of the leaves, and it causes defoliation. And when a tree loses its canopy, it also stops putting energy towards its root reserves. And so we've seen a lot of Myoporums because they have low vigor in the canopy. We also see them root fail. And I want to point out that the owner of the building actually applied to remove these because, as we all keep saying, city moves slow. So in this case, the Bureau of Urban Forestry's timeline, because we're doing tree removal and pruning on a grid cycle, the grid for this area wasn't going to be coming for at least another year. And so the applicant felt that if he had to wait that long, he would go ahead and take on the cost of the maintenance himself. And that's why we're hearing this case today. And so this one, yeah, it's a Myoporum and it has a disease called thrips. The canopy doesn't look as bad as one might think, but inside the canopy, you can see that there's a lot of dieback. There's again, no interior canopy. That is all died off. It has the least access to the sun, and when the tree is diseased and the leaves aren't photosynthesizing, it's not going to retain them. And then the second tree is a ficus here. It has had a major failure, equivalent to its size. So basically from in the past, it's only half of its canopy is still remaining. It is extremely stagnated in growth, and its root crown is actually buried. So it also has very poor structure. It has just a tuft of canopy at the very top. If this tree had the potential to grow larger, it would potentially have limb failures. However, in this case, the tree has barely grown in the last several years, and it has a buried root crown. Root crown excavation would be extremely difficult in an area where there's a high traffic sidewalk, and it may or may not even be successful. So there you can see that the root crown is buried. So a buried root crown means that not very much oxygen is actually getting to the roots. Most trees have their roots in the top 36 to 18 inches of the soil. There's no such thing as deep roots, really. They need oxygen, and that usually exists at the top layers of the soil. And it has had a major limb failure, and it has not really recovered from that. So it lost a lot of its photosynthetic material, and it's taken a lot of time to recover. The wound wood is not even that compartmentalized, and I think that's because it has low vigor. So trees put on what's called as wound wood, and what's called wound wood, it's part of a process called compartmentalization of decay in trees. And they put on this wood to stop decay from furthering. And in this case, the edges are not very sealed off. And you can see this like smooth, sealed off bark whenever you see a cavity. And in this case, it's not. So it's still kind of decaying, albeit slowly. And then the second tree is a similar ficus. This one has not had a limb failure, but it's also very stagnated in its growth. It's right next to a street light. So if there were a chance that it could grow larger, we probably come back and remove any of that additional growth just to make clearance for the street light. So anytime it would be putting on leaves and growing in canopy, it would just be hit back to make clearance for that street light. But again, I don't think it has this potential to grow large because we have photos of these trees from at least a decade back and they have not grown much in size. So they have pretty low vigor and slow growth. So they're not really putting on the needed growth here. So again, here's that poor structure we're talking about. It's pretty difficult to correct at this size. Ficus are not very resistant to decay. They're probably a medium level tree that when you consider resistance to decay. So if you were to prune back and remove limbs to fix the structure, it would likely introduce decay into this already small stagnated tree. So again, the root crowns, I believe that they've been buried. I don't know when this tree was planted. I have to go look back in the records, but when it was planted, its root crown was buried and it's essentially stagnated at this point. And so these are photos of the trees from 2012. They're not very much bigger. And the bust zone is gone. The applicant has asked to remove and replant the trees. This is not construction related. The applicant has just asked to remove and replant them to beautify the street. And the applicant has asked to replace with 3 Mexican fan palms because they are culturally significant in the mission. So to be consistent with how we handle similar cases and the applicant's willingness to perform the removal and replacement on behalf of the Bureau of Urban Forestry, we approve the removal of this application.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Nobre. So as the department has asked this be continued, my recommendation to the director is just going to be this can be continued. But if anyone would like to speak on this matter, to let the department know of their concerns or issues, or if they want to save their powder for the official hearing, so be it. So I see Mr. Karn's hand is raised. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, just can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
My standard comment, so when I first saw this listed, it was back in, it's quite a while back. Anyway, there was no application. It said that the owners had applied for an application, had applied for a permit, but I went online to the permit file, there's nothing there. But there was a long description on the website that said the neighbors just thought these trees were ugly and wanted to get rid of them to make things look better. And so that's pretty much it. But please, Bureau of Urban Forestry, it's very difficult for us out here in the peanut gallery, to get information on what you're doing is incredibly difficult. And if you give the permit number, we can at least look that up. Other than that, we're running blind out here. We probably don't have the resources to travel down there and look at it, and we're not arborists anyway. But any information you can provide that we can get access to, much appreciated. So, and if you could publish the application on this one before it comes up for hearing again, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Carnes. And just for the record, I'm not gonna make notes on any of this because it's just gonna be continued. So, but please feel free to share. Mr. Clip, you had your hand up next, so why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, just very briefly, I would just strenuously object to planting more palms along the side and along any type of public right of way. They have absolutely almost the equivalent of a blade of grass when it comes to their carbon benefits. So please, I'm not trying to say anything against the cultural significance of them. I cannot speak to that. But in terms of what our city needs, it is not that. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Clip. Mr. Nolte, your hand is up. Would you speak, please? Or-
Yes, can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay, great. Yes, I was also going to say the same thing as Josh Clip was saying about the palm trees. I don't see that as a realistic thing for the Mission District. It may be culturally for them, but a palm tree does not sequester the there's a number of things a palm tree doesn't do that the current trees that are there does do. So it's not replacing the trees that were there and what they were doing for the shade and so forth for the neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you for speaking, Mr. Nolte. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Okay, seeing none, we'll close this item. And again, this item is just going to be continued at the request of the department due to the typo. So we'll get it right next time. Okay, so with that, let's go on to the next item, item number 6 on the agenda. It's order number 203790, 2943 Harrison Street. Consider removal of one street tree with replacement and removal of one significant palm tree on private property without replacement at 2943 Harrison Street. Staff approved the removals and the public has protested. Ms. Nawberry, would you like to speak?
Hi. So, yes, we're considering the removal of a significant palm tree and a street tree that is a Prunus cercifera plum tree. And sorry about that. So essentially the plum tree is in poor condition. And what we've seen with these plum trees over and over again is that they don't put on a ton of growth now with the warming climate and lack of rain. And I'll talk about the plum tree first. You can see in January 2020, it is flowering, and then there's been negligible annual growth. You can see the nodes, like basically from the tip of that tree, you can see like growth, and it's put on very little. And it has a little bit of decay on one side, probably from being hit by a car. So it's also poor at compartmentalizing that. The owners agreed to replant this tree. It is replaceable. And yes, so here's the decay happening. There's no wound wood on that. So there's not the nice ring of compartmentalization that you see on trees that have good vigor. When a tree has good vigor, it has the energy to dedicate to compartmentalizing and sealing off decay. And also because one half of this tree is dead, it can't transport water up to its leaves, and vice versa, the leaves can't transport sugars down to the roots. So for this reason, the tree has multiple reasons. The tree has low vigor, and also it's not compartmentalizing the very decay that's causing its inability to transport nutrients. And the palm tree, sorry, these are a little out of order. I'll go back to the palm. Basically, this setback is very small, and this palm tree has essentially reached the size where it's starting to hit the property. And so when the wind blows, palms can sway quite a bit when the winds blow. Any video of like a hurricane in Florida, you'll see the palms just bend down almost towards the ground and fling back up. So they're incredibly spring loaded, and they have quite the potential to hit and damage property. And so you can see it's planted right up against the property facade, which is why it has very little space to grow. And you can see on the left, the courtyard is actually a lot smaller than one might think. Because of this, we're not requiring the replacement of that palm tree, But the owner has agreed to, and therefore we are requiring through the permit to replant that plum tree. And so we will get a new street tree in return for that removal that we are granting. But this palm tree, we don't believe that there's adequate space to replant. The owner can do what they want with that site. If they want to plant something, they can. But you can see on the photo on the right, the distance between that fence and the existing tree, it's only about 10 feet. So we require that trees also be spaced adequately, 15 to 20 feet, usually 20 feet because we would like to see large stature trees go in. So there probably wouldn't be very much room for two trees without the canopies competing with one another. But we will advocate for a larger stature replacement tree here because there are no high voltage lines. They're just service drops. So those are low voltage, trees can touch those. So we'll be advocating for a nice, healthy, large canopy tree that can survive this future climate, whatever that might bring. But we're not requiring the replacement of that palm tree. So to be consistent with how we handle similar cases and the declining health of the plum tree and the fact that the palm tree is growing in a space that is considered too small for this palm tree, we approve the removal of both trees with replacement of one.
Okay, very good, thank you. So with that, are there any members of the public that wish to speak? If so, please raise your hand and we'll get to you. Okay, Mr. Carnes, you got your hands up quickly, go ahead. Mr. Carnes?
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me
Okay.
now?
Sure can.
Okay, so again, this is the third on the list of 6 trees, but there's no permit information online. And I think I've run into this before, and that is that there are 2 ways to apply for a permit. One is you print out a piece of paper and write a check and mail it in. And those get filed in the permit file online. And then there's another way there's a new way to apply for a permit, which is to go online, type in your information and hit send. And you'd think those would go online right away, but they don't. They get buried somewhere. And if I want to see a copy of it, I have to go through records request, et cetera. So Buff, please, put all of your permits in the online permit file so we can take a look at them. Without that, we're just flying blind, as I mentioned. So, and the little prune tree doesn't look like it's bothering anybody. You probably leave it there for quite a few more years, but there you go. Thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your comment.
All right. and
I see
Joyce?
Joyce G. Yes, Joyce G.
Hello?
Yes,
Go ahead.
Joyce.
Okay, great. I actually live at 2941 Harrison Street. The address for this property is 2941 Harrison to 2943 Harrison. I live on that upper unit of that building, and I just kind of want to reiterate that when the wind is blowing, that palm tree has actually damaged my windows, which we replaced 2 years ago with double paned windows, and they're 84 inches, so they're custom windows. So those windows are about $2,000 each. So there is already property damage that is being, that's actually happening now with that palm tree. So we would like to remove it. It is really close to the house and it's really big. Regarding that plum tree is really sad. It's really sick, and it has been hit by trucks. They've been doing work on the Garfield Square pool and park. There's Azteca Hauling has about 4 different trucks that they park on the street. We don't have permit parking. And of course, all of the people who come to play in the soccer field, sometimes they'll get a little bit too close to that tree. So it is really damaged, and it's really sad. you know, and it's not recovering. We are very, very conscious of plants. And planting a lot of trees in our backyard. We have olive trees, we have an avocado tree, we have 2 Japanese maples. We are big supporters of having trees, but we don't want them to be really ill or in poor health. And that's why we're making the move to replace that tree with something that will thrive and not just barely survive. So that's my comment.
Very good. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for calling in. Mr. Clip, I see your hand is up.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a question about the stature of a replacement tree. As Ms. Nobbery noted, there's no high voltage overhead, which usually is preventative or prohibitive to planting a larger stature tree. And my guess is that's been the case for a while. And yet one of the smallest statured short-lived trees, which is the purple leaf plum, that incidentally is such a bad street tree, it's not even on the approved street tree list anymore. Somehow that was planted in this prime space. So I guess what I'm wondering is, if we've known this for a while, why wasn't the larger tree planted there a long time ago? And what assurances do the public have that a large stature tree is actually going to go in there now, really maximizing this unique basin? And as somebody who looks at a lot of basins, I can say that there aren't many along public rights of way where you have the opportunity to plant large statured trees that have the most environmental benefits. So I guess seeing what's in there right now does not inspire confidence that something larger is going to go in. And I guess that's my question, is how.
Again, Ms. Nobbery, I mean, if you want to respond, you're welcome to. It's not necessary. Up to you. I know the department is required to, the approved street trees and required to follow whatever the code requires, but go ahead if you'd like to respond, or if not.
Because this is a permit application and because our code does allow for us to require a large stature tree, we will work with the applicant. And you can write that in your decision that we'll work with the applicant to plant a tree and species and size suitable for the space, and the applicant will work with the Bureau of Urban Forestry to select the tree.
All right, very good. Any other comments on this matter? Okay, seeing none, we'll close item number 6 on the agenda, and we'll move to the last item on the agenda. Item number 7, it's order number 203-796, 198 McAllister Street. The order supersedes Public Works Order 203-791 to consider removal of 8 street trees with replacement at 198 McAllister Street. Staff approved 2 removals and the public has protested. Staff has denied the removal of 6 street trees and the applicant has appealed. Ms. Newberry.
So we approved the one tree on McAllister and 1 tree on Hyde.
Okay.
And the tree we approved on Hyde, it's site number 4, but obviously you can see that there aren't 4 trees here. It's the Tenderloin. It's very difficult to establish trees. So the tree here that we've approved for removal has low vigor. It's essentially going to be replaced in kind. It has not grown much since it's been planted. So we approved that tree. And then we approved site number 3, tree number 3 on Hyde. It's an olive, and it's the one tree here that we approved that is similar to the other trees, yet it lacks clearance over the road, and there's not any really amount of structural pruning that can correct the clearance. You're required to have 14 feet of clearance from the curb upward, and there's large wood here where that 14-foot mark is. So you can't prune that, and so that would just continue to be hit by trucks and other vehicles parking. So we did approve that tree. The rest of the trees we denied. And this is a large stature established olive tree. And we believe that the project can work around this tree. The sidewalk damage here could be mitigated with a larger basin. And we denied this other tree, 57 High Tree 2. Also another tree that we don't see any clearance issues with. It's at the curb. And because the trees are at the curb, we think that the project can work around these trees and make room and have access points elsewhere and retain trees that are established. Again, it's really, really difficult to establish trees in the Tenderloin. Everybody knows it's a very, very harsh condition, not just for humans, but for trees. And for this reason, getting trees to even be this size in the Tenderloin is extremely difficult. So another tree we denied. I will admit that this one could use a little bit pruning to bring in some of the overextended limbs. But again, we are loath to approve trees in the Tenderloin that can even get to this size. It's extremely difficult to establish trees and let them grow in the Tenderloin and protect the basins from all the things that enter the basins and keep the tree from growing. Trees in the Tenderloin need a lot more water than your typical replacement tree because of the various salts and things entering the basin. And this provides some much needed canopy in an area that has very little canopy. And another tree we denied for the same reasons. Again, it doesn't lack clearance and it's at the curb. So we're hoping the project can work around these trees. And the other thing is because these trees are small but yet established, we think that there should be adequate space for the building, that you don't have large canopies that would need to be drastically pruned back to make room for scaffolding. This tree is an empty basin, so thankfully the project, I believe, will be replanting it. The project will be replanting it, so we are appreciative of that. Sorry, we put a slide here that didn't belong there, but the one on the right, please ignore the one on the left. The tree on the right has some canopy, but we denied that because we think that that canopy can be pruned to allow for sidewalk clearance. And this is the replacement plan. It currently shows 16 trees, but I'm not quite sure, and I'm hoping the applicant can speak to this, where the final placement of vaults are. And so I just want to point out that it's a removal of 8 trees where the project is going to or planning to replace with 16 trees. But I would like to ask about the final placement of vaults, because we have seen that vaults can eliminate 1 to 2 tree sites per vault. So if there's 2 vaults, then we think that the replacement of 16 might actually be 14 to 12. Either way, it appears to be a net gain of trees, but we don't want to overpromise replacement trees because that can lead to issues with the permit in the future. But we do hope the applicant can speak to placement of vaults and maybe give an estimate of the replacement number.
Okay.
So to be consistent with how we handle these cases, the health of the olive trees, the situation in which they're being removed, we denied the removal of 6 of the trees and approved the removal of 2.
Okay. Very good. So since there's questions for the applicant, before we go to the public, I think it's probably appropriate to have the applicant speak. If someone from the applicant would like to speak, you push the raise the hand button. Well, there I see one. Okay, Mr. Zucker.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I sent a presentation for a slideshow. I was told I might be able to share my screen or have it put up.
I think that's
go ahead. This is Justin. I've got to promote you, and then I'll ask you to go ahead and share your screen. Are you there?
It looks like he disappeared.
No, I had to make him a panelist so he
Oh,
could
I see.
share the
Okay.
screen.
He went over the other screen. Gotcha. He's there, but he's still on.
So Justin, oh, he's already doing it.
Okay, great.
Okay, and Cerise, do you want to have the time? Go ahead. Go ahead, Justin. Justin, go ahead.
Good evening, Hearing Officer Goldberg. Justin Zucker from Reuben Junius and Rose on behalf of applicant UC Hastings. And with me from Hastings is Rhiannon Baylard and arborist Roy Leggett. Hastings appeals the denial of permit to remove 6 street trees and is also here in support of the permit to remove 2 street trees, a total of 8 trees adjacent to the campus. Hastings has been a long-standing neighborhood partner with the current building, having been constructed in 1965, and seeks to equitably mitigate the impact of the construction-related street tree removals. To that end, Hastings presents a green community benefits plan that Rhiannon will elaborate on later. As part of its applications, Hastings will plant double the number of trees removed as mentioned by staff, planting 3 trees on Golden Gate, 10 on Hyde, and 3 on McAllister. Someone from the construction team will be able to speak as to the vaults, but it's my understanding that the vaults will go in place where they currently are and should not impact the design, but they will speak to that shortly. The old Hastings building is being demolished to make way for sorely needed student housing within a highly efficient, beautiful, sidewalk activating and academic and residential building, purposely designed to welcome students, visitors, and the community. Removal of the 8 trees is necessary for 3 reasons. First, removal is necessary to ensure a safe construction site. Second, retention of the existing street trees throughout construction is not feasible. And third, the conditions of the existing street trees support their removal, which arborist Roy will address after. As seen in the red, the project calls for demolition of the existing building and excavation of a pit, in some places to a depth of 25 feet below surface and immediately adjacent to the sidewalk. The excavation requires new shoring tiebacks, and the sidewalk itself will be fully removed and replaced. The contractor build group has carefully considered possible configurations for the construction site, but due to constrained conditions in the surrounding urban area, the project will need to utilize a drive lane, the parking strip, and sidewalk space along Hyde Street. For coordination of activities with trucks lining up, such as concrete delivery and mobile placing boom setup for the foundation and perimeter basement wall pours. By removing the trees, the project will be able to maintain 3 lanes of travel on Hyde Street, which is being required by SFMTA. If the trees cannot be removed, the project's site logistics plan would cause the closure of Hyde Street down to 2 lanes, which SFMTA has indicated they will not support. Even if 2 lanes were allowed by SFMTA, the existing trees along Hyde Street lean into the street, and they would have to be trimmed to the curb, necked, which would result in damaged trees susceptible to failure. Moreover, it is not feasible to retain the existing trees because due to construction needs, significant trimming of the tree's roots would need to be done for excavation and shoring. The root trimming is likely to compromise the tree's structural integrity, and coupled with necking, likely to shock the trees, resulting in their demise down the road. That concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions. I'll now turn it over to Roy, then Rihanna. Thank you.
Okay. Next speaker? Can you identify yourself, please? Who's up next?
Hi, this is Roy Leggett.
Okay.
Hi, I'm the consulting arborist Mr. Zucker just made reference to.
Correct. Okay.
Yeah, my associate Aaron Wong and myself, both of us are certified arborists and tree risk assessors. And we evaluated these trees together. There are a lot of injuries to the trees from trucks and I don't know, buses, whatever it is, passing traffic. The trunks of these trees are generally all out of plumb. So they're leaning this way or that, and branch structure is relatively low with a lot of beat up branches. There is canopy, I give you that. Susan is right, that it's a rough neighborhood, and the trees that are somehow established and have grown in that neighborhood are difficult, or it's a challenge to replace them. So we are of the opinion that we're dealing with fair to poor condition trees in each case because of all of the injuries. Going into a construction project and looking at tree retention, when you're starting with trees that are already compromised like that, is not likely to lead to a very successful outcome. Even if the physical space somehow can be worked out where they can actually mobilize all the trucks and cranes and equipment and materials that they need to build this and work around these trees. I expect that the trees will both be heavily cut back, and they will also sustain a lot of damage from the construction process. The whole idea of going into that with trees that are in, at best, fair condition and more typically poor condition is, those aren't great candidates to really put into that equation. I don't think we're going to have a great outcome that way. The fact that Hastings is putting in all of these new trees, they're going to be putting those in with a continuous trench, irrigated, and a far more conducive environment for root development than the current trees have. So it's going to be an improved infrastructure that is tree oriented and benefiting the trees. So although there are a lot of social concerns about losing trees, I think that the new trees will have opportunity to perform well. And I think that's an important weighty factor in this particular case. So that's all I have for you.
Well, I have some questions. So, accepting the fact, I mean, Ms. Nalbury also spoke to that it's a very challenging site for trees. So, and these ones, for lack of a better reason, are survivors. What kind of trees would be planted, and what would make you believe that the new trees would be more successful? Or how would they, how can we essentially guarantee that they would survive and thrive as opposed to these ones that are hanging on?
Well, John, I think those are great questions. As far as the new trees that are going in, I don't know the species, but I know they're going to be 36-inch box trees. So they're going to have stature, which is above and overhead. The canopy won't be large and developed yet, but they'll have that lower framework of trunk and branch structure that gets the canopy already overhead, where we don't have, vandalism, for instance, just branches getting broken off by passersby. The trunk is going to be larger with thicker bark and more substantial bark in any species, regardless of the species of the tree. And then what I was hinting to earlier is that there's a continuous trench in the design where it's going to be, we're basically going to have a horticultural soil environment running along the whole curb length. So it'll be like a big planter bed that's underneath the surface pavement that allows for root growth to develop through that entire area. And it's not just a construction site when we're done, but it's actually horticultural soil. So
Okay.
that's why new trees would be able to grow in that and be successful. That's the idea.
Okay. Okay, so we don't know what trees they're going to be, but they're ones that were, and because of the new condition, you're fairly confident would do well.
Well, I don't actually know the species. I was asked to evaluate the existing trees and then make comments on that in the planning site. There may, it may be that Mr. Zucker has more information about the new species that are going in, or I'm sure we can work that out with Bureau of Urban Forestry. I would certainly be willing to put effort in on new tree selection, and so that it's the best that we can do and provide canopy that is likely to succeed there.
Okay, all right. No, I mean, it is a very challenging location. I'm aware of that. So I appreciate that. Is there someone else to speak from the applicant?
Yeah, hi there. This is Rhiannon Baylord. I'm the Executive Director of Operations. However, I was going to ask if it's all right with you all to have Eric Quinn, who is with Build Group, respond to the question on the vault that Ms. Nawbury raised, which we think is an important one, and he has some information on that.
Please, I think that would be very useful.
I've given him, he can go ahead and speak. You can go. Please unmute.
Can anyone hear me?
Sure can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Do you mind going back to the slide that shows the plan view of our project with all the new tree locations called out? Just so I can speak to that. That one right there, perfect. So there is one tree location that is on this plan that is going to be in conflict with an existing PG&E vault. This big concrete vault was originally built to service the building as a network vault back in the 50s or 60s. The project plan was to have this vault removed. Unfortunately, PG&E has very recently denied that because they're currently using it as a distribution vault for other properties in the area. It no longer services the existing building, but other buildings in the area. So if you count from the corner of McAllister and Hyde on Hyde Street, 4 trees back is right where that vault sits. So there you are right there. That concrete manhole or vault is the width of the sidewalk and about 18 feet wide. So there's no way to plant that specific tree there because of sort of this decision made by PG&E to keep the vault beyond or after construction. So I know that Rhiannon will speak on mitigation measures after this, but I'm just speaking on the vaults that are conflicting. And then if we go, there's a number 7 vault currently on Hyde Street as well, just to the south of that distribution manhole. We're moving that so that it's out of the way of this soil trench and moving that down to the corner on Hyde Street. We should be able to get it out of the way of that far south tree on Hyde Street, so that's allowed to be planted, but the exact location of that tree might have to be shifted so slightly to avoid that vault and the clearances that PG&E recommend. But this is not a new vault, it's just a shift of an existing vault to try to make way for all these trees on Hyde Street.
Okay, so the representation is that only one of these trees that's proposed would be eliminated because of the vault.
Correct, with a possible second, but I can't say guaranteed or not whether that second one. The far south on Hyde Street, so if you're on Hyde Street, the far right one that we're looking at right now.
Okay, so Ms. Nawbury, do you have any questions since the builder's here to speak to the vaults that you're?
No, I just to be clear, when like the decision is written, we won't say that it's the replacement of 16, but we'll say with the estimate of replacement of 14 and that in lieu fees will be paid for any trees that can't be replaced. So depending on the building frontage, Oh, I'm sorry, actually, I can't speak to the in lieu fees on a state-owned property. But we will say that the maximum of 14 trees is likely to be planted. But I think the point is that it's still a net gain of trees, it sounds like. But we just want to be very transparent about the number of replacement trees is really just the point of getting the vaults kind of out of the way.
Okay, so for my question, are these city street trees or is that state property?
These are city street trees, but the building is on state property.
So if the trees are removed from the city property, there would still be in lieu fees or no?
Sorry. So if they were to remove trees without an equal number of replacements, we would assess in lieu fees for the loss of each tree site. But in this case, there isn't a net loss of trees.
It would be a net gain. Okay,
State properties don't trigger the construction code.
gotcha. Okay, super. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate that information. And
No problem.
So next speaker from the applicant.
Yes. Hi, everybody. This is Rhiannon Baylord. And just to spell that name because it's difficult, it's RHIANNON is the first name and last name is Baylord, BAILARD. I'm the Executive Director of Operations at UC Hastings Law. And today I'm going to be speaking about our Green Community Benefits Plan, which is our plan to mitigate for the trees that have to be removed as a result of this campus housing project. But what I want to do first is just to answer one of the questions that you raised, Hearing Officer Goldberg, which is about why these trees would be successful. I know the arborist, Roy Leggett, answered that in terms of some of the technical and the horticultural aspects of the ways in which they'll be planted. The other piece I want to mention is for the trees that we're going to be planting both on site, and we're also proposing some off-site replacement, and I'll mention that in just a moment. We're going to be doing maintenance as well as a commitment to replace those trees, and both of those for a 36-month time frame. So in other words, we're going to be working with a community partner to do insured watering, pruning, anything that's needed along those lines, as well as was pointed out, we are subject to vandalism in the Tenderloin. So if those trees get removed, we'll be willing to replace those for a 36-month time frame, which is essentially the period of construction for us. So just with respect to, and then the other question you asked, I apologize. You were asking about the species of the trees. All of the species, of course, are going to come from Urban Forestry's preferred street trees list. We have already selected species for the on-site trees, which are Golden Rain on Hyde, Water Gum on Golden Gate, and I think Southern Magnolia, on McAllister. However, all of that is subject to discussion and coordination with both community partners as well as the Bureau of Urban Forestry. So with respect to our plan, as mentioned, we've already talked about, of course, the on-site replacement. Sounds like we were planning on a 16, sounds like we may be looking at 14. However, I do want to note that, of course, as stated, we are going to be doing maintenance for those as well as replacement if any of those are lost. And one thing I did want to mention as well is that there is a significant stand of mature trees on the other side of Hyde, so that even though these trees will be removed in the short term, we do have a nice canopy, a nice shade structure on the other side of Hyde Street. So I did want to point that out. But in addition to that on-site replacement, we are doing off-site placement of 8 to 16 additional trees. And frankly, the reason that number is a spectrum is for just this type of thing. We want to make sure that we're doing more than just, the 2-to-1 replacements. We want to give some additional buffer there. So it's 18 to 16 trees within the broader Tenderloin neighborhood. That's going to be utilizing a mix of trees and here we've got, thank you, Justin. That's going to be utilizing a mix of trees from the Urban Forestry Preferred Street Trees catalog. Of course, you can see here some proposed sites. We're looking at locations, of course, that have south and southwest exposures, avoiding SFMTA daylighting zones. These are some locations that we've already started to identify, but ultimately what we want to do is we want to, as part of this Green Community Benefits Plan, is have a collaborative process, both with urban forestry as well as with our community partners. And so the idea is we want to identify the right trees, the right locations, so that it will have the greatest community impact, as well as being the best site. Oh, sorry about that. Seems like I'm getting a little bit of an
Thank you,
echo.
Ms.
So,
Yes, Ms. Baylor, your time is up. Thank you.
oh, okay.
I mean, you know, we'll let you go a little longer if you have some more things you want to.
I apologize. I was trying, I was
No.
answering questions at the beginning. I didn't realize my time was running at that point.
That's okay. Go ahead. We'll let you finish. I mean,
Okay. Okay, I should have taken that into account, the answering questions. So the other two pieces of our community benefits plan, one is that we are going to be providing funding for a parklet at La Casina Municipal Marketplace, immediately across the street at Golden Gate and Hyde. We know that this doesn't directly offset the loss of ecosystem services from the trees, but it's a near-term community benefit, providing open space, outdoor activation at a very troubled corner for residents of the Tenderloin, who many of whom don't have these types of opportunities. And then the final piece that we're doing is we are creating a green community benefits fund. We'll be providing the seed money for that. Essentially what that is we're going to be working with community partners to form micro grants for greening projects within the Tenderloin. And first up is to replace a tree that was lost at Bodecker Park. The hope there is that, subject to COVID-19, we would be able to have a community engagement process around that. But nevertheless, that would be the first, a kickoff of that green community benefit fund that we would be working to create with other community partners. So in conclusion, I apologize for going long, but our commitment is to work with the community to more than offset, you know, we're talking about a 3 to 4 mitigation ratio for replacement of trees, 3 to 4 to 1 replacement of trees, as well as seeking to fund that parklet, as well as this green community benefits fund in order to mitigate for these near-term impacts, but also to be a good community partner for the Tenderloin. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Byler. I have a couple questions.
Please.
So I guess the initial proposal was the 16 trees, and now we're down to 14, maybe 15. And then the additional 8 to 16 trees, that's a pretty wide margin. So I guess, you know, can we, you know, why such a essentially 100% difference in the number of trees that is being proposed?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons for that spectrum was for just this sort of possibility that we learned about just now as we're having this discussion with the vaults. But if it would be more beneficial to have a precise number of trees, we could go, you know, somewhere in the middle of that, so to speak, and see if a firmer commitment would be helpful.
Well, I mean, I think for the city and for the public, and the director in making the director's recommendation, he'll make the final decision. And I'm not suggesting that there's any, you know, nefarious thing, but obviously cost is always a factor. And if one had a choice between spending less or spending more, you'd go 8. Right. And so I think the director would like to see a firm commitment that is willing to be held to. I think that would be influential to him.
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, I think we could commit to ensuring that we do a 3 to 1 ratio.
Okay, so we have so just so when I write it up.
So there's 8, yeah, go ahead.
So we have 14 on site, 14 to 15 on site, and then how many additional trees will Hastings commit to, if that's the Director's
So,
decision.
so essentially, assuming that we hold, it'll be 24 total, but assuming we hold strong with the 14, it'll be 10 off site. If we end up with a situation where, you know, we end up having to go down to 13, then that means we would do 11 off site. So the two numbers sort of work in concert with each other.
Okay, so the Hastings will commit to 3-1, and these are 36-inch box trees?
Yes.
And
I apologize. I know that's the case for the on-site. I don't know. I assume it would be the same commitment for off-site as well. I don't know if the arborist, if Roy has any thoughts on that, but my assumption is we would go with the same.
Okay.
And again, of course, that would be subject to size of off-site tree wells.
Okay, and
That would be, you know, the only constraint.
I got, and the commitments, three years of maintenance or replacement?
Correct. And that's from, so we will be, that's from the point at which we implement and replace the on-site trees.
Well, okay, well, so again, let me clarify this so I could, when I write it up.
Please.
Is construction, you say, is 3 years.
It should be done in, go ahead.
So if the trees are in 3 years, from that point, let's say you don't plant the trees in the neighborhood until a year later. Would that make that a 2-year commitment from them, or is it 3 years from the time those trees are being planted?
Yeah, well, we can start to work on the offsite in the near term. So the onsite, of course, we're not going to be able to do until we've got the construction completed. Right, but so it'll be 3 years from the point of which the trees themselves go in.
Okay, very good. That, just so I can write that up. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the interest. And let me ask Ms. Nalbury if she has any questions for you since we're here. While you're here.
Officer Goldberg, Mr. Leggett has his hand up as well.
Okay, very good. Well, we'll start with Ms. Nalbury, and then we'll go with Mr. Leggett.
You can actually have Roy Leggett go first.
Okay, Mr. Leggett, do you want to speak?
Yeah, sure, that's fine. Hi. Well, Brianna made mention of maybe having me weigh in on the off-site tree plantings that are community-oriented tree plantings. And I think that a good way to approach that would be to allow for flexibility in the size of trees going in, depending on the circumstances. For instance, I worked on a project with the Trust for Public Land where we collected tree data on a number of pocket parks, including and smaller neighborhood parks, and one of them was Bodecker. So I'm very familiar with Bodecker, and there are a lot of residents that really use that park, and it's a very valuable commodity. And putting the tree in there, I think it'd be appropriate to have a 36-inch box tree going in there. And it might be appropriate in front of certain storefronts if those are locations, because they need better clearances. But there might be other situations where smaller trees, Ms. Nalbury made reference to smaller trees as being preferable in a lot of ways, because the watering requirements are less and they establish quicker. They're actually a better performing tree if you have the right circumstances to plant those. And for the same reasons that Public Works likes to plant those smaller ones, I think that it might be good to build in a little flexibility for this project, just to allow for looking at smaller tree basins, maybe more limited space or closer spacing, and other competing uses for the sidewalks. So I don't know, smaller trees might have some benefits and advantages in the long term.
So your recommendation or suggestion might be what, a 15-inch box to a 36-inch box, depending on site specific?
Yeah, the smallest tree, which is the tree that Public Works likes to install, it's called a 15-gallon tree.
Okay.
And then the next size up is a
24.
24-inch box, and then
Okay.
36-inch box.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it would be depending on site specific. Okay, just so we
Yeah.
have a sense. Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome.
Ms. Nobry?
I'd say if possible, for the sake of the decision, I would require the 36-inch box for the on-site trees. Since those are going to be the replacement trees we count for this permit specifically. And then the off-site trees are kind of gravy on top of that. But we ask that if you're not going to plant a tree that's the size that could be resistant to vandalism, is to consider putting some sort of screening, which I think the UC Hastings is pretty familiar with, because I think I've seen that around that neighborhood. So some sort of consideration for prevention of vandalism, but I think that the specific requirement for the box size only needs to apply to the trees on site.
Very good. Okay. All right. So with that, we've got the applicant, we've got the department. Let's go to the public and see if anyone from the public wishes to speak. I see a hand up. I don't know who's yet. Oh, so I have Simon.
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
I can't. Yes, sir. Simon, it says
Hi.
TLCP. Who's that?
Yes, it's Simon Bertrand. I'm the executive director of the Tenderloin Community Benefit District. We're a property assessment district based in the Tenderloin. And I wanted to, oh, can you hear me?
I sure can.
Great. And I wanted to speak in favor of the proposed project and the proposed Green Community Benefits Plan. So we represent a broad range of residents, property owners, and business owners in 40 blocks of the Tenderloin. And I wanted to commend UC Hastings for the approach that it's taking, in this proposal. And we of course support the project, the building itself, but in this proposal to remove these olive trees in particular, we do, as has been noted by the department and by the applicant, it's a tough environment, and it's always a shame to remove a tree that is even just surviving, given that it can often be difficult to survive. But we wanted to commend the approach that UC Hastings has taken in partnership with the community to develop a comprehensive plan that not only replaces the existing trees and does doubles the replacement on site, but also looks off site to how the community as a whole can benefit, whether it be these, I guess it was decided 8 to 12 trees, however many trees offsite was the final determination, that there would be offsite trees. And I think in addition to the replacement, the thing that's significant to me is the commitment to maintenance, because again, given how difficult it can be for trees to establish themselves in the Tenderloin, that commitment to 3 years of watering and maintenance and potential replacement feels really significant in terms of the ability to guarantee that we will get the Tenderloin community will get a benefit in terms of increased canopy. And then secondly, the investment in the parklet across the street at the La Cocina Municipal Marketplace, as well as this idea of the Green Benefit Fund, seeding a Green Benefit Fund. Both of those feel like something which will be able to support not necessarily trees in the Tenderloin, but greening in the Tenderloin. And so the combination of this entire proposal, plus the way that UC Hastings has approached it, recognizing that there is a harm that is being caused here, it may be necessary, but it is still a harm, but proposing a very significant mitigation of that harm. So the Tenderloin Community Benefit District strongly supports the proposal, and I guess I will end it there. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much for speaking, sir. Mr. Clip, I see your hand up. Go ahead,
Yep,
sir.
can you hear me?
Sure can.
All right, thanks. So in the first photo that Susan showed, I planted that. tree 6 years ago with Friends of the Urban Forest. I have a photo of me standing in front of it with a friend who I convinced to come out with me early on a Saturday morning and plant trees. And it's hard to emphasize how disheartening it is to see that work performed by volunteers like me who gave time and energy to put it in the ground, to see that undone just 6 years later. I don't know if it's even been 6 years, let alone to see the condition of it. And speaking of trees and their condition, all of the conditions noted by Mr. Leggett, I will just point out, we're under the supervision of the applicant since Prop E wasn't passed until 2017, and those trees far preceded that in terms of who was responsible for their maintenance. Regarding trees being plum, trees not being plum is pretty much the state of most of the trees in this city, so that in and of itself should not be a reason that a tree is removed. And also trees being vandalized is also pretty much the state of trees in this city. Our standard for tree removal should never be what we think is a perfect tree, because that doesn't exist in nature, and it sure as heck doesn't exist in San Francisco. Also, regarding an opportunity to perform well, they're going to be planted in the exact same place. There's really not at this point any reason to believe that just putting a new tree in is going to mean it's going to succeed. A better soil is not going to fix the problem of vandalism and maltreatment that happens above grade. I'd also like to note this is the second time that I'm at a removal hearing related to trees in UC Hastings construction in just a few years. I understand that this is a multi-phased construction. I would be curious to know from the applicant if we're going to be back here for any more proposed tree removals related to this multi-phase construction. I'd also like to know if there's been any consideration for transplanting any of the existing trees so we don't lose the benefit of those altogether. This is something that Hastings has done in the past for removal in 2018. And if the trees cannot be transplanted, has there been any consideration for wood reuse, perhaps even in their designs? Finally, it may sound like I'm coming down pretty hard on Hastings, but I do want to commend them for this plan. I do think it's a model of how businesses and development can work in partnership with communities and community organizations. With that, I will say also, though, that a lot of this plan is dependent on cooperation from city departments. And unless those departments agree to this, it's not enforceable. For example, a tree at Bodecker Park, that's under the jurisdiction of Rec Park. If they don't agree to it, it's not going to happen. Commitments to plant additional trees in the surrounding neighborhood, that requires a permit from Public Works. Public Works doesn't give them the permit, it's not going to happen. So without the partnership of the city, this plan is only a plan, no matter how much the applicant intends to see it happen. So I would like to know if the city has or is willing to agree to it, and if not, why not? And that's it. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Ms. Bylard, I mean, you're not required to respond. If you'd like to, you may, but it's not necessary. And I don't see anything. All right, with this, we'll go to Mr. Nolte. I see your hand up. Why don't we go ahead, Mr. Nolte?
My name is John Nolte. I'm the co-chair of the Terraline Tree Campaign, and I've been dealing with trees in the Terraline for over 20 years. So surpasses the consultants and the other people that were talked for the property owner on this issue. So I really, let's start back in April of 2015. UC Hastings planted a streetscape project that had yearly to replace the trees on its three sites at 100 McAllister, 198 McAllister, which is this site, and 200 McAllister. And I was there the other day. There were no postings for this hearing on those trees on Hyde. Why? That's the first issue. Second issue, when this was put on your website for removal, it only talked about 2. Now we're up to another 8 or whatever trees to be removed. So when you posted it, it didn't even talk about this number of trees being removed. Next, going back to 2015, it was a streetscaping project, over $2 million, and still part of that streetscaping is on the 200 block of McAllister. And you'll see right now that they want to put trees back on McAllister. Well, those are now gone. They were empty plots. They are supposed to be beds with other with plants and so forth. I didn't hear anything about that in any of the presentation. And here the city, they spent $2 million on that plan. Now they wanted, again, for free. And they knew about this plan for developing the properties way back then. So I am concerned about Hastings and their partnerships, concerned about that saying that they're going to put 18-inch boxes. It should be 18-inch or 24-inch boxes to be put in. We want the fencing around the tree plots, because when they're planted, so they won't be lopped off. That's what happens. I personally police reports on trees being destroyed right the next day after they've been planted. So I don't see it. I actually only a block away. So then the last issue of a parklet at 101 Hyde, that is city property now, and they're supposed to be building on that property. It's the old post office, and that property is supposed to be now turned into a business until the city gets money for 101 Hyde. So
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Nolte. That's your time.
You shouldn't be putting a parklet on city property.
All right, Mr. Nolte, thank you. Ms. Byler, you had your hand up. Do you want to just finish off, or did you want to respond?
Sorry about that. I was just trying to respond to the earlier speaker.
Sure.
And on that, I was just going to say that, we absolutely agree. And we look forward to working with the city, but we also look forward to working with other community partners. But the intent behind the mitigation plan is that it is supposed to be malleable. I mean, that was part of the reason that we had the spectrum. We agree with going off of the spectrum and having a firm commitment with 3-to-1. But we want to be malleable in terms of what's available. If Bodecker Park, if that tree replacement is not an option, we will do something else for the Green Community Benefits Fund. And so I don't think that there's any one location or site that is going to make or break us for that mitigation plan. Absolutely agree that we do hope and look forward to that city partnership and working together. But we're also going to be flexible in terms of what we implement to make sure we're able to achieve the intent of the plan regardless.
Very good. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Let's see, where's my agenda? So I think that was the final item on the agenda. So I will write this up and send this to the director for his decision. So I want to thank everyone for their time and their patience. These Zoom meetings are not always perfect. I also want to apologize to Clint Otwell and Cerise Waiters. I could have introduced them at the beginning of the hearing. They were behind the scenes making sure things were taken care of. So thank you, Clint. Thank you, Cerise. And then Ms. Nawberry, I probably butchered your name 3 or 4 times. I should have asked you before the hearing how I should pronounce it, but I failed to do so. So I apologize for that. And I promise next time I will make sure I get it right. So with that, I want to thank you all for your time, and I will write these up and get it to the director's office in short order. So thank you all. I think that's it. With that, we'll call the meeting to a close, and that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.